top of the episode, a little bit of news real quick. John, you wanted to mention, I guess, the Dune performance, the Dune announcement. What do you
Yeah.
got here?
Just the fact that Dune 2, Dune Part 2, has been officially announced. It's the other shoe dropping. I mean, we were kind of talking about it as though it might not happen, but I think we all sort of knew that surely they wouldn't put out a movie that says Part 1 at the beginning
Right.
if they didn't have plans for doing the Part 2. I mean, it is the
Right.
same company that would be making that decision, that's making the
Yeah.
decision to put that at the front of this movie. But it did also feel at a certain point in there, it felt like it might be like a gambit that Denis Villeneuve needed to kind of get ahead of it and be. He was in the press talking about how he was ready to go, and you don't see that all the time. That did feel a
Right.
little bit like a public negotiation or something like that. I don't know, but maybe it was always the plan to do it this way. Certainly, Dune is a movie that people have been talking about for the last week. So I guess just to kind of, I wanted to see what you guys think about now that we know we're getting to Part 2. Does it change your feelings at all about Part 1, Ronald? And also, Steve, you finally saw it, and you can now. I think you announced to us that we can chalk up
Yeah.
another win for your buddy Denny. Talk to us a
Denny.
little bit about Dune.
I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you guys said. I mean, I did decide to go see it in theaters. I saw it on one of the Dolby screens here in Baltimore, or the AMC version of it, the Prime screen. But I absolutely love this movie. Like, again, I come to it not knowing really much beyond the documentary that we've talked about a few times on this podcast, but I've never seen Lynch's film, never read the book. So I kind of went in liking the cast, liking the idea, and knowing a little bit about, like, I guess a little bit about the idea of, like, it kind of feels like this story is behind the eight ball a bit, because there's so much that have come after it that seemed to have been inspired by it, whether it's Star Wars or The Matrix or any of these stories. So Dune, had a bit of an uphill battle in terms of a movie piece, just to kind of like show how important it was and can be, and hopefully will be, once they get around the Part 2 and whatever else Warner Media does with this franchise. But in general, I do, being able to see it on the big screen was a privilege, I think, and I mean, that theater is like my go-to for any of these big scale things that I really try to see in theaters. And I mean, I'll say that, and then I watched it again over the weekend on HBO Max, and I still loved it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like it's the kind of thing where I'm going to say you can only do it in theaters. Like, obviously you see it where you're comfortable seeing it. But I did make the exception and went, and I'm very happy that I did, because I don't know, man. Like, it's just like, it's one of those things where you get this world building, and it's like this whole thing that I'm just super invested in seeing more about now. And the cast is great. I mean, visually, the score, everything about this movie feels special to me. And yeah, Denny is basically undefeated in my book so far. I mean, it's crazy to think about what he's put out in 10 years.
Nobody talks about Enemy. I liked Enemy, but
Me
no
too.
one really talks about
Me
it.
too. Yeah, it's probably the weird one of the bunch.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's still great. I mean, Jake is great in it. But I mean, I think the thing that like got me so much about Dune was like, and I mean, this is no cut on anybody else in the movie, because I think everybody is great. Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, Oscar Isaac. But Chalamet is like the second coming guy. Like, he's the guy that studios are trying to make happen on the biggest scale possible. This movie is an example, and he's going to be the next Willy Wonka. You know what I mean? So this is a guy that they have a lot invested in.
Yeah.
But listen to this though. Like, I feel like my takeaway from it is, like, I walked out of that theater convinced that now I believe that, like, he's a star. Like, he completely, every shot he's in that movie, he is gorgeous. And like, he has this brooding, he has the emotion, he's got some levity when it needed it. And I mean, I just feel like, especially being surrounded by this murderer's row of like amazing actors that are like, people that I'm sure he, looks up to and that are mentors to him in a lot of ways. But I mean, this is the one for me. Like, I've liked him in a lot of movies that he's been in. And honestly, most of the movies he's been in, I've always liked him in it. But I've never feel like I've admitted out loud that I think that he has it until the it. Now, that doesn't mean box office or whatever. I'm just saying, like, that star power.
Yeah.
I just felt like it really clicked for me seeing him in Dune. And I mean, as Paul, and just seeing where this story goes, and again, not knowing where it goes, I'm kind of fresh on it, and I'm fresh on him. And I just feel like I was just wow. I thought he was incredible in the movie. And I mean, like I can't wait to. I mean, literally, I'm talking my wife into trying to watch it with me because I want to watch it again,
Yeah.
and I just think that it's like this large scale thing that I probably have like an appetite for that I really haven't had a lot in this last year and a half that we've talked about a few times on the podcast. Admittedly, I haven't seen Shang-Chi still, and I really want to see that. And I haven't seen the new Bond, but I mean, this was the one that I felt like I kind of wanted to go for it, for who he is and what the story is and what it looked like to me. But yeah, everyone's great in it. Momoa, I think it's probably the best thing he's done.
I was going to say
He's so good.
Momoa and Chalamet, like both of them have had like, I would say I've seen them in things where I've thought they were good, and I've also thought, well, what are they really capable of, or what kind of,
Right.
can Momoa kind of loosen up and be natural and warm, and can Chalamet kind of, he's very actorly in a way, and there is something very serious about him. And I do think sometimes you can look at someone, and you're right, when someone's kind of pretty and they're talented, you kind of wonder, like, it's like that thing that people go through with certain people, when, like, even I went through it with like Anne Hathaway, of like, she's too talented. It took me a while to warm up to her because she seemed like, well, she's just everything's stacked in her favor. She's just an actorly actor. I do think, I wouldn't say maybe this is the one that clicked for me, but like maybe Little Women and a couple of other things set me up to this feeling of like, he brings something to the scene. He's playing little moments. He's not overplaying it. He's not like, his expressions aren't like overplaying the emotion, but he does show you what's happening inside his character on his face. And I know that sounds like a silly thing to say because that's what actors kind of do. But I'm just saying, for a movie like this, where it's going to have a lot to do with the look of the character, he does a really good job of selling like the weight of it, and even the kind of cool factor. I mean, there's one scene that I think of, if there's only one moment that feels a little too like, I don't know, music video-ish, there's that long scene of him on the cliffs, like walking around in the grass, and he's wearing like a nice outfit, and he's that's the only part of the movie where I thought, okay, are they just shooting like a perfume commercial or something like that? But the rest of the time I thought it all worked together. So yeah, the fact that he's got this very striking look, and yet, like you said, you just mentioned some of the most beautiful people in Hollywood as well. But those scenes between him and Jason Momoa, I felt like both of them kind of went up a notch in my mind. I was like, they both are playing like Chalamet is playing a little bit more of a kid in those moments, and Momoa is playing this kind of, I don't know, uncle type, and who brings a shot of warmth to this movie. I think Momoa is one of the more likable characters in the whole thing. So, no, it's interesting. I'm really intrigued by some of the characters they have yet to cast, and what they might do with the next one. I mean, I think the sad thing is this is going to be a few years out. This is not like going to be a quick turnaround movie, but it is cool that it's, it's official and people can now relax, and they're going to get part two. They're going to get to see the eyes turn blue in the movie.
It's a little more complicated than people are letting on about the announcement, because there's a regime change. Discovery's buying Warner Brothers, and they could just say no. I mean, that's a weird thing to say, but it could happen. But I do think this is a really cool acquisition that Discovery's doing for a bunch of reasons. Christopher Nolan is out of the Warner Brothers business. He pretty much said fuck them, and he's leaving. It's not a thing anymore. And there's a ton of rumor, but with the way that Tenet was treated, more than likely he's not going to do a film with them again, right? And so you got Denis, who is getting into a business of what is the unmakeable film that everybody keeps saying, the unmakeable book, and presents it in a way that's palatable, that's really obviously stunning, and plays well. I know it's a more complicated thing than Star Wars in general. There's just a lot more moving parts, a lot more source material. But I don't think that this could have been made any better than this, for the time, for the space, for the director. Just something about the way that this, it's not perfect, but I think we should watch the 1984 version and maybe review that down the line. Just that, it's been restored. It's, And maybe we could even get into the TV shows, the sci-fi TV shows.
Well, I mean, one of the things that movie did was it tried to
dirt.
cram it all into one movie, and then they had to deliver a movie that was
Right.
much closer to 2 hours than 3
Yeah.
when it came down to the edit. So I think that movie lost like 45 minutes right, you know, in the home stretch,
Right.
and was an attempt to make it into one movie. And David Lynch even talks about how he didn't get to make the movie that he wanted. But you'll find people who will say they love that movie, and sometimes it has to do with the source material. But also, Ronald, have you seen a few people, like Dune is now one of those things. It's like Batman's and Spider-Man's, and it's like you can now, it's James Bond. It's like you can kind of have the Dune you like. You can have the miniseries that was on television. You can have the original David Lynch movie. You can be a book purist. But this feels like it is, I think, the question of a lot of people, and myself included, was, can you bring people into this world in this movie? And I think this movie did do that. And I think for the, you know, Steve being a person who came in cold, having the reaction that he did is testament to that. I came in like half cold. I don't know how cold you were, but I mean, you know, I knew some of the iconography from the movie, but I did not have the storyline memorized. And I think it's almost, like I said before, it's kind of deceptively simple. It seems really complicated, but it's similar to you if you followed some of these recent sagas, whether you're talking about Star Wars, whether you're talking about Game of Thrones, anything. It's got that, it's that like overlay of like mature ideas and sort of adult themes over this fantasy story. So it's sort of like, it's got that. I don't know. I just think that, as you said, it may not be perfect, but it's hard to picture them doing a better job for right now, for today's audiences, of turning people on to this idea. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. Isn't there an HBO Max series coming too? Isn't that something else?
Yeah, about the group of women, the
Bene Gesserit.
Yeah,
Bene Gesserit.
A spinoff with them.
I got the terms down, dude. I'm like, I'm ready. Let's go.
You're a full-on nerd.
Yo, I'm full on, dude.
Have you seen the Dune poster where they put in all Joey Tribbiani's and it says, "How you doing?"
Yeah. But yeah, I guess we all like this thing, man. Like I watched it twice. I watched it in a big setup, and then I watched it in the living room with 2 Apple speakers, and the sound editing is just the mix of this movie just surprises me. I've watched it twice. The first time really, really loud, like unreasonably loud, with Aaron not in the house because she would have fucking went crazy. And then we watched it together, and she liked it. She's just like, "Oh, this is pretty fucking good." You know what I mean? Like, it's intimidating. It's an intimidating movie. If you watch the trailer, you're like, I can't get with this. This is too fancy pants for me. But
or when you start too grim or something, like the trailer doesn't show some of the more. I don't know. I mean, I think it is fun in its way, but it's not going for fun in the way that we're used to these popcorn movies. And I think that's kind of part of that thing we're talking about, where it feels a little more substantive or adult or something, is that it's not trying to take you on a roller coaster ride, but it's got a couple of real payoff action scenes. That scene with the sandworm and the spice mining machine and stuff, that's a great action scene.
So good, man.
And the choreography of it and the visuals of it, it can be done. You can make a good adult sci-fi movie. Not just Oblivion. It can be done again.
Move over, Oblivion.
So, Ronald, did you relax knowing that there's a part 2? Like when you saw it, like when you saw that news, did you think? I know you said that there's still some iffiness around that, but as far as just, doesn't that make part 1 seem more sensible as a movie now that there will be a bookend for it?
I was stressed, to be honest with you, man. Especially watching it the second time. You're like, okay, I've seen it the first time, and then everything starts to make sense the second time you see it. It's like a gift that keeps on giving. I'm gonna watch it probably again. Like I notice little things, but yeah, I'm like gearing up in the last 10 minutes. I'm like, okay, you know, I'm not gonna give anything away when the final act happens, and you're like, okay, things are about to change for the better or the worse. I don't know. And then it's just like, boom, get the fuck out of here. Yeah, credits come. Yeah, man. It's great.
Well, that's Dune.
It's Dune.
Anything else about Dune, Steve? You were the newcomer to it.
Nah, man. I'm happy the part 2 got announced. I'm happy that it exceeded the estimates on the weekend and still did a pretty good number on HBO Max. I think it's at like 1.9 million, which is not the highest by any means. Right. I think, you know, there's a few that were definitely higher than it, but I mean, it definitely is kind of above the average for these movies. Definitely the biggest box office that they've had for quite a bit. I think probably, I guess since Kong, Godzilla, maybe. I think maybe it did more. I can't remember if it did more than that or not. but yeah, it's just good. Like, there's positive things around it. I know we had doubts, and there was a lot of concern about, like, is this going to be the real big flop of the whole thing? And I don't think it's going to reach the heights it could have, but I mean, I think it's doing way better than some people thought it could do. And I mean, I think globally it's already, it's pretty much on its way to making all of its money back before you even get into ancillary stuff. And I would be completely shocked, even through the Discovery stuff, like if anything changed with part 2. I kind of feel like part 2 was always a plan. Like, I don't think, I mean, beyond the having part 1, which they kind of hid from the marketing in the title card, like, I feel like that was a move, a flex to say, like, there's going to be more, kind of like it did, but at the end of it. But I mean, I just feel like the way that the cast and the filmmakers have been talking about it, and the idea of, like, the whole possible lawsuit that was happening with Legendary because of the HBO Max stuff, like, there's conversations happening with people way, way higher than we'll ever know, that I'm sure was like, if this shit's going on HBO Max, like, you're guaranteeing a part 2. Like, I don't doubt that ever was a plan. It's more of a, how do we tease it? How do we string it? And then we'll announce it the Monday or Tuesday after opening, to kind of really impress on people, like, see this in theaters still, because, like, it's going to be on HBO Max for 30 days. And then you want to see this in theaters because in 2 years, part 2 is coming out.
Right.
And don't you think it's kind of funny the way that, like, they probably did think, let's do the flex of saying part 1 at the beginning and then announcing the sequel a few days after that. Yeah. But what ended up, like, it's one of those things that, I wouldn't say it backfired, but it's one of those things where it's like, if you were the PR person who decided that, you'd look back and go, we created a little too much confusion about this by never announcing part 2 and then it getting out that this is very much half of the story. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was that couple of weeks where people were like, what is this? Is this going to be, like, should I even get invested in this if they're not going to be able to finish it or whatever?
Right.
And I wonder, like, for fans of the saga, people who love Dune, would it have been better for them to know, oh, we're getting the whole story, going into this movie the weekend that it came out and all that stuff. But either way, you're right. It does almost seem like this is the way they planned to roll it out all along. Yeah. And it was only scared rabbits like us who have to talk about movies every week who noticed and got concerned. But I think our concerns about it flopping were based on a sense of, it feels like there was a time when it looked like everything was contracting again, and it felt like any movie that came out in that span was going to be just a financial loss. Yeah. But I don't think it ever quite contracted to that extent. There have been a few big hits since then. Since we had those concerns, it's been more of a steady thing that, like, every weekend there's some top movie that has decent numbers.
Right.
And they're not always the ones. I mean, I think we can expect all the predictable ones to be number 1 the weekend they come out, but which ones have staying power are going to be the ones that,
Sure.
that people talk about. But also, I think the home release thing, it does change it. Like, I think a lot more people would be going to see these movies clearly in the theater if they couldn't see them at home. But it sure is nice to be able to watch it at home. And I agree with you. Dune looked great on my television. I don't have any complaints about that. So,
yeah.